The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which Seraphina Voss would later think was fitting. Tuesdays had always been the day things went wrong. She was elbow-deep in her apothecary cabinet when the boy knocked, a gangly child of perhaps 10 who held the sealed envelope as though it might bite him. The seal was black wax stamped with a stag's head. She recognized it before she turned it over. Everyone in Delmere knew the Blackwell crest. "His lordship's steward sent me," the boy said. "He said you're to come today," said not to wait. Seraphina wiped her hands on her apron and took the letter. She read it once, then again, then set it down on the work table beside her mortar and pestle. The Earl of Blackwell was dying. That was what the letter said, though it dressed the fact in careful language. "His lordship has suffered a prolonged illness, and the household physician is at a loss, and your particular expertise in botanical remedies has been recommended most highly." She had never met the Earl. She had never been to Thornfield, his estate, which sat 3 miles east of Delmere, behind a wall of iron gates and older rumours. What she knew of him was what everyone knew, that he was 32, that he had come back from the war with a limp and a reputation for solitude, and that in the 4 years since his return he had not once attended a social event in the county. She knew one other thing, which the letter did not say, but which the black wax implied well enough. The Earl of Blackwell was not expected to last the month. She told the boy to wait. She went upstairs and changed out of her working dress, packed her case with the things she thought she would need: willow bark, activated charcoal, her reference volume on toxic compounds, the small glass vials she used for sampling, and came back down in less than 20 minutes. The boy looked surprised. Perhaps he had expected her to argue. Seraphina Voss did not argue with dying men. She had learned that much from her father, who had been a country physician for 30 years before his hands gave out. "Go when you are called," he used to say. "The time for asking questions is after you have looked." She had been looking ever since. Thornfield was not what she expected. She had built it up in her mind as something forbidding. All dark stone and barred windows. But the house that appeared at the end of the drive was simply large and somewhat neglected, its gravel path edged with weeds, its eastern wing showing damp marks along the upper stones. A house that had not been properly attended to in some years. A house, she thought, that had been run by people whose attention lay elsewhere. The steward who met her at the door was named Fordham, a compact man of perhaps 50, with careful eyes, and a manner that was correct without being warm. He thanked her for coming. He showed her inside without offering her tea. She noted both things. "How long has he been ill?" she asked as they climbed the main staircase. 7 weeks, and the physician's assessment: wasting illness, fever that comes and goes. Some days he is well enough to sit up and take broth. Others, Fordham paused at the top of the stairs, others are less good. What has he been treated with? Tincture of iron, quinine, the usual tonics. Seraphina stopped walking. 7 weeks of quinine. Dr. Shelby felt it appropriate. She said nothing. She filed the information away and followed Fordham down a corridor that smelled of beeswax, and beneath it, something else, something faintly medicinal that she could not immediately name, but that prickled at the back of her mind the way certain things did when they were wrong. The Earl's chamber was at the end of the hall. Fordham knocked, opened the door, and stepped back to let her pass. She went in. The man in the bed was not what she expected either, though she could not have said what she had expected. He was tall. She could see that even prone, with dark hair damp against his forehead, and a quality of stillness that was different from sleep. He was awake. His eyes, when he turned them toward her, were grey and sharper than a man in his condition had any right to be. "You're the apothecary," he said. His voice was hoarse but clear. "Seraphina Voss." She crossed to the bedside and set down her case. "May I?" He held out his wrist without being asked. She took his pulse, too fast, slightly irregular, and looked at his fingernails, his lips, the inside of his lower eyelids. She asked him to open his mouth. She asked him whether he had any pain in his abdomen. She asked whether he had noticed a metallic taste. He looked at her when she asked that last question. "Yes," he said slowly. "How did you know?" "I didn't," she said. "Not yet." She straightened and picked up her case. "I'll need a lamp, and I'll need to speak with whoever prepares your meals and your medicines." Behind her, she heard Fordham draw a breath. "Is that strictly necessary?" he asked. "Yes," she said pleasantly. It is. She spent the rest of the afternoon in the kitchens, which told her a great deal, and in the still room, which told her more. The cook was a stout woman named Mrs. Paley, who had been at Thornfield for 20 years, and who answered every question with the particular frankness of someone who had nothing to hide and was tired of people acting as though she might. The kitchen maid was younger, quieter, and watched Seraphina's hands whenever she picked something up. The still room was where the household medicines were prepared. It was Fordham's domain. He overt himself told her, because the Earl's late mother had kept it that way, and the tradition had continued. Seraphina spent a long time in the still room. She opened jars, she smelled things, she held small amounts up to the lamp and looked at them with the close attention her father had trained her to have from childhood, when he had taught her to read a compound the way other men read text. Slowly, looking for what wasn't supposed to be there. She found it in the tonic. It was cunningly done. The base of the preparation was unremarkable. Common enough ingredients, properly measured, nothing that would raise a question on its own. But there was a third element that did not belong, present in an amount small enough that a physician looking for ordinary illness would never test for it, small enough to extend the dying over weeks rather than days, enough to weaken without immediately killing. She stood very still in the still room with the tonic in her hand, and she thought about what this meant. Someone in this house wanted the Earl to die slowly. She thought about Fordham's careful eyes. She thought about the kitchen maid who watched her hands. She thought about the Earl's grey gaze when she had asked about the metallic taste, sharp and present in a face that had every reason to be dull with illness. She set the tonic down. She locked the still room door from the inside, took a sample from every jar she could find, sealed them in her glass vials, and put them in her case. Then she unlocked door and went back upstairs. He was sitting up when she returned, which she took as a good sign. Someone had brought candles. The room was warmer than it had been that afternoon, and in the better light she could see him more clearly. The lines of his face, which were not the lines of an old man, but of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time. There was a scar along his jaw that she hadn't noticed before. The war, probably. Or something else. She didn't ask. "Well," he said. She sat down in the chair beside the bed, which was not strictly what one did when calling on an Earl, but she found that she was tired of standing, and that he did not seem like a man who cared particularly about protocol. "I need to ask you some things, and I need you to answer honestly. I generally do. Who else lives at Thornfield?" He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, the faintest tightening around his eyes. "Why, please," she said. "Just answer." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "My cousin, Roderick Vane. He arrived 6 weeks ago, said he'd come to help manage the estate while I was ill. My housekeeper, Mrs. Drummond, who has been here longer than I have. Fordham, who you've met, the kitchen staff. 2 footmen, no other family. I have a younger brother, Clement. He's in Edinburgh. He went last autumn to study law." A pause. "We do not correspond frequently." She noted the careful way he said it. "And your cousin Roderick? What is his relationship to the title? In the event..." She stopped. "In the event I die without an heir." He said it evenly, without self-pity. "Roderick would inherit, yes. He's next in line." Seraphina folded her hands in her lap. She looked at the window, which showed darkness now, the last of the evening gone. She looked back at him. "Lord Blackwell," she said, "I believe you have been poisoned." The silence that followed was very complete. He did not look shocked. That was the thing she would think about afterward. He did not look shocked at all. He looked, if anything, like a man who had suspected something for a long time and had just been told he was not imagining it. "How?" he said. "Your tonic. Something has been added to it, a compound that accumulates slowly in the body and produces symptoms indistinguishable from a wasting illness. Fatigue, fever, abdominal pain, the metallic taste. It would not have been detected without specific testing." She paused. "It was not detected because no one was looking for it." "Shelby," he said, not accusatory, thoughtful. "Dr. Shelby would have had no reason to look. This is not a common poisoning. It requires knowledge of botanical compounds and access to this household still room." She kept her voice steady. "The tonic is prepared in the still room, which Fordham oversees." His jaw tightened. "I am not accusing anyone yet," she said carefully. I am telling you what I have found and what it implies. The evidence points towards someone who had both the knowledge and the access. That is a short list. Fordham has been at Thornfield for 15 years, he said. I know. He was my father's steward before he was mine. I know that too. She looked at him directly. But someone has been putting poison in your medicine for at least several weeks, and I do not think it began the day your cousin arrived, though his arrival was convenient timing. Someone in this house wants you to die of an illness that looks natural. The question is who is doing it, and whether they are acting alone. He was quiet for a long time. The candles threw warm shadows across the room. Outside, she could hear wind in the trees, the distant sound of the stable clock striking 9. What do I do? He said. It was asked simply without pride. She appreciated that. First, she said, you do not take any more of the tonic. I will prepare a replacement myself, made here in this room from my own case where I can be certain of what goes into it. Second, you do not tell anyone what I have found. Not Fordham, not your housekeeper, not the kitchen staff. No one. And third, she said, you trust me. He looked at her for a long moment. In the candlelight, his eyes were the colour of winter water, pale and very clear. All right, he said. Miss Voss, I will trust you. She did not go home that night. She could not, practically speaking. Delmere was 3 miles in the dark, and she had no way back until morning. But even if she could have gone, she thought she would not have. She asked for a room and was given one, small and cold, and at the opposite end of the corridor from the Earl's chamber, and she sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after midnight, with her case open on the floor beside her and her father's reference volume in her lap, reading the chapter on heavy metal compounds by the light of a single candle. Her father had been a methodical man. He had believed in following evidence the way one followed a path through unfamiliar woods. One step at a time, never running, always looking at what was actually there rather than what you thought you would find. She tried to think like him now. Roderick Vane had arrived 6 weeks ago. The Earl had been ill for 7, which meant the poisoning had begun before the cousin arrived. That was important. It meant either that Roderick had arranged something before he came in person, paid someone inside the house to begin the work on his behalf, or that Roderick was not the one who had started it at all. Perhaps someone else had begun the poisoning for reasons of their own, and Roderick's arrival was genuinely coincidental. Perhaps there were 2 separate parties with 2 separate motives, and the situation was more complicated than it appeared. She closed the book and stared at the candle, or perhaps the person who had started the poisoning was not Roderick, and Roderick's presence was deliberately arranged, called in, or manoeuvred into coming, so that suspicion would fall on him while the real culprit continued undisturbed. She thought about Fordham, his careful eyes, the way he had hesitated when she asked to speak with the kitchen staff, the still room that was his domain. She thought about who benefited from the Earl dying slowly rather than quickly. A slow death meant time for the household to adjust, for documents to be arranged, for certain things to be put in order. A slow death also meant less scrutiny than a sudden one, less likelihood of anyone looking closely. She blew out the candle and lay down on top of the bedcovers with her coat still on. In the morning, she decided, she would talk to Mrs. Drummond. The housekeeper was a tall woman, angular and precise, who had the look of someone who had kept a great house together through sheer personal determination for so long that the effort had become invisible even to herself. She met Seraphina in the morning room with tea she had not been asked to provide, which was its own kind of statement. "You're staying on then," Mrs. Drummond said. "It was not quite a question. For a few days at least, his lordship asked me to." This was true. She had stopped at his door that morning and told him her plan, and he had agreed to it with the steady attention of a man who was feeling, possibly for the first time in weeks, that someone was actually trying to help him rather than manage his dying. "He needs a proper physician," Mrs. Drummond said. "He has one coming. I sent for Dr. Alcott in Harlow this morning. He's more thorough than Shelby, and he owes me a professional courtesy." She watched the housekeeper's face. "In the meantime, I am here." Something in Mrs. Drummond's expression shifted. "You think it's more than illness," she said. Very quiet. Very flat. Seraphina set down her teacup. "What makes you say that? I am not a foolish woman, Miss Voss." Mrs. Drummond looked at the window. The morning was grey, the grounds showing patches of frost. "I have kept this house for 19 years. I know when things are wrong. The smells in the still room have been different for weeks. I mentioned it to Fordham, and he said he had adjusted the tonic formula on Dr. Shelby's advice." She paused. "I should have asked more questions. I did not." "You didn't know what you were looking at," Seraphina said. "No." A long pause. "But I knew something was wrong. That amounts to the same thing, in the end." Seraphina thought of her father again. "The time for asking questions is after you have looked." "It does not," she said. "Knowing something feels wrong and knowing what is wrong are very different things. You couldn't have acted on a feeling." Mrs. Drummond looked at her with an expression that was hard to read. Something between relief and grief, as though she had been carrying a weight and was being told, perhaps correctly, that it had not been hers to carry. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Tell me about Mr. Vane." The housekeeper was quiet for a moment. "Roderick Vane has visited Thornfield twice in the past 5 years, both times briefly. He and his lordship do not. They are not close. He arrived in September, claiming he had heard his lordship was unwell and wished to help oversee the estate. I had no grounds to turn him away. And since his arrival, he has involved himself a great deal in the estate accounts. He asked Fordham for the past 3 years of records." She paused. "He has also twice suggested to me in passing that his lordship might be more comfortable if moved to a smaller room, as the master chamber is draughty. I declined both times." Seraphina thought about this. A man positioning himself to inherit, making practical arrangements, looking at account books, assessing the property. And yet, "The poisoning began before he arrived," she said. Mrs. Drummond looked at her sharply. "At least a week before, possibly more. Which means either he arranged it remotely or someone else began it," Mrs. Drummond said very slowly. "And Roderick coming was not his idea at all." The two women looked at each other across the morning room. "Fordham," the housekeeper said. "Just the name. Nothing else." "I don't know yet," Seraphina said. "But I intend to find out." She found out on the 3rd day. She had been methodical about it, the way her father would have been. She spent the first day establishing herself, taking her meals in the house, speaking with the kitchen staff, becoming a familiar presence so that people stopped noticing her particularly. She spent the 2nd day in the still room openly this time, reorganizing the shelves on the pretext of taking a full inventory. She found 3 more anomalies, small things individually. Together, they pointed in one direction with the particular clarity of evidence that has been carelessly hidden by someone who expected it never to be found. On the 3rd day, she went through Fordham's correspondence. She was not proud of this. She had thought about it for a long time before she did it, weighing what she knew against what she still needed to know, weighing the Earl's life against her own sense of what was acceptable conduct. She came down in the end on the side of the Earl's life. She told herself her father would have done the same. She was fairly sure this was true. The letters were in a locked box in Fordham's office, which she opened with a method she had learned at 16 from a locksmith's apprentice who had been briefly and disastrously in love with her. There were 12 letters. She read all of them, standing at Fordham's desk with the door closed in the space of 40 minutes. She went directly to the Earl. He was better. 4 days without the tonic, replaced by her own compound of restorative herbs, iron-rich broth that Mrs. Drummond now prepared herself under Seraphina's supervision, and clear water from a source she had personally verified, had begun to show. His colour was improved. He had been sitting in a chair by the window when she knocked, reading, which was more than he had managed in weeks. He put down the book when he saw her face. "Tell me," he said. She told him everything, the letters, what they said. The arrangement between Fordham and Roderick Vane, because it was an arrangement, had been for over a year a correspondence of careful language and coded references that nonetheless told a clear enough story. Fordham, who had managed the Blackwell estate accounts for 15 years, and who had, over the past several years, quietly redirected funds in ways that did not appear in the official ledgers. Roderick, who had discovered this 3 years ago, and who had not reported it but had instead written to Fordham with a proposition. Fordham would ensure the Earl's declining health continued. When the Earl died and Roderick inherited, Fordham would be compensated handsomely, and the discrepancy in the accounts would disappear. They had been partners in it from the beginning. What had looked like coincidence, Roderick's arrival, Fordham's involvement with the tonic, had been coordinated. Roderick had come in person because the poisoning had been taking longer than expected, and he wanted to observe and possibly to accelerate. The Earl sat very still while she spoke. He did not interrupt. He looked out the window, at the frost on the grounds, the bare trees, the iron gates at the end of the drive. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Fordham," he said, as she had said it. "Just the name." "Yes, 15 years. Yes." Another silence. She did not fill it. She had learned by now that he thought in quiet, and that the quiet was not emptiness but work. "My brother," he said finally. "Clement. If I had died, Roderick would have inherited, but Clement would have had nothing to contest it with," she said. "The accounts would have been cleaned. The death would have looked natural. There would have been no evidence of any irregularity." She paused. "Clement would have inherited a title and an empty estate, eventually, when Roderick died. But Roderick is 38 and healthy." His jaw tightened. "He would have taken everything." "Yes," he turned to look at her. In the daylight, without fever dulling him, she could see what he would look like when he was well. The sharpness of his face, the way he held himself. A man who had survived a war and come home to something worse, and had not yet known it. "What do I do? Send for the magistrate," she said. "Today, before Fordham has any indication that you know. Before Roderick can leave." She hesitated. "Mrs. Drummond can be trusted to manage the household until this is resolved. She has been doing it already, more than she should have had to." He almost smiled at that. "She's been doing it for 19 years, he said. "Yes, give her the authority to match the responsibility when this is over." He looked at her for a moment. "You're very particular," he said, "about making sure people receive what they're owed." "My father believed in it," she said. "I suppose I do too." The magistrate came that afternoon, a solid, sensible man named Hargrove, who listened to Seraphina's account with the focused attention of someone who understood that she was not wasting his time. He read the letters. He asked precise questions. He thanked her with a formality that was also, she thought, genuine respect, which was not always the case in her experience. Fordham was taken into custody before supper. His face, when Hargrove presented the evidence, went through a sequence of expressions that Seraphina watched from the doorway of the corridor. Calculation first. Then the brief calculation of whether denial might work. Then a stillness that was something between relief and defeat. He did not speak except to confirm his name. His careful eyes, in the end, were empty of anything that surprised her. Roderick Vane was a different matter. He argued, as men of his type did, with the particular volume of someone accustomed to having his objections carry weight. He cited his standing. He cited his grief at the accusations. He turned at one point to the Earl, who was standing at the doorway of his own study with one hand on the frame for support, still not entirely steady on his feet, and said with an expression of wounded dignity, "You cannot seriously believe I would do this. I came here to help you. I came because you are family." The Earl looked at him for a long moment. "You came," he said, "because Fordham told you the poisoning wasn't working fast enough, and you wanted to see to it yourself." He said it quietly, without particular heat. "I have the letters, Roderick. Every one of them." Roderick left Thornfield between two of Hargrove's men, still arguing. The sound of it faded down the drive, and then was gone, swallowed by the cold afternoon. She should have left the next morning. There was no professional reason to stay. Her role had been concluded, or more than concluded. She had done considerably more than she had been asked to do. She had her own apothecary to return to, her own clients, the Tuesday orders she had not yet filled. But Dr. Alcott had arrived from Harlow, and she found herself wanting to brief him properly, to go through the compound with him, to make certain he understood the treatment protocol. That took the morning. In the afternoon, Mrs. Drummond asked whether she might look at the still-room inventory one more time, and she did. In the evening, she found herself in the library, which was where the Earl was reading by the fire, and she had not intended to stay, but the chair opposite him was comfortable, and the fire was warm, and he said, without looking up from his book, "The Harlow Road is iced over. Mrs. Drummond says you should wait until morning. She had had every intention of pointing out that she had driven worse roads than iced ones, and that her time was her own. "Thank you." "All right," she said instead, and sat down. He looked up then, briefly, with something in his expression that was quieter than amusement, but in the same territory. Then he looked back at his book. She found hers, a volume on medicinal plant cultivation that she had noticed on the shelf the day before, and had been meaning to look at, and opened it, and for an hour there was no sound in the library, except the fire and the occasional page turning. It was the most comfortable hour she had spent in recent memory, which said something, though she did not examine too closely what it said. "You saved my life," he said eventually. Not dramatically, just a statement placed into the quiet the way one sets down something one has been carrying. "You hired me to," she said. "Fordham hired you. I did not know who you were until you walked in. Your steward hired me then. Hired me to keep you alive, which turned out to be more complicated than expected." He looked at her over the edge of his book. "You are very determined not to be thanked." "I'm not opposed to being thanked," she said. "I'm opposed to being made into something I'm not. I did my work. I followed evidence. I used what I know how to do." She turned a page. "That is what I do. It's not particularly remarkable." "It is," he said, "from where I'm sitting." She did not answer that. The fire shifted. Outside she could hear the wind. "Seraphina," he said. Her name in his voice, for the first time, not Miss Voss, but simply her name. "Thank you." She looked at him. His face in the firelight was steady, the fever entirely gone now, replaced by something that was simply himself. A man who had come home from a war and been quiet about everything it cost him, who had sat alone in a house that was trying to kill him and had not known it, who had looked at her on that first evening with grey eyes, and said, "I will trust you," as though it cost him very little when she suspected it cost him a great deal. "You're welcome," she said, and meant it. She left in the morning. The road was clear enough, the ice having softened overnight. She drove herself, which was also not what one did after staying 3 days at an Earl's estate. But she found she preferred it. The cold air, the familiar road, the particular satisfaction of moving under her own direction. Her shop was exactly as she had left it. The Tuesday orders were waiting. The apothecary cabinet was still open from when the boy had come to fetch her, which felt like a very long time ago. She worked through the afternoon and into the evening, filling orders, restocking shelves, making notes in her reference book about the compound she had found and the treatment she had used. Careful notes, precise ones, because the next person who encountered something like this would need to know it was possible and what to look for, and that it could be treated if caught in time. She was finishing the last of the notes when the knock came at the door. She knew who it was before she opened it, which was interesting. She could not have explained how she knew, only that she did, with the particular certainty of a thing that is not a surprise, because some part of you has been expecting it without having admitted as much to yourself. He was on horseback, which meant he had ridden 3 miles in the dark, which was the act of a man who did not want to wait until morning to say what he had come to say. He looked better than he had even yesterday. More himself, the illness still visible only in a slight hollowness beneath his eyes that would fill in over time. She stepped aside. He came in out of the cold. "I went over the accounts today," he said, "with Mrs. Drummond and a man from Harlow." It took most of the afternoon. He looked around her shop with the focused attention he gave everything. The shelves, the jars, the lamp burning on the work table. "The shortfall is significant." Fordham was thorough. "I imagine he was. There are also several decisions that were made in the past year that I am now questioning, knowing what I know." He turned to look at her. Decisions about estate management, tenant leases, the upkeep of the northern fields which have been neglected in a way I had accepted Fordham's explanation for. "You trusted him," she said. "You had no reason not to." "I trusted him," he agreed, "and I stopped looking because I trusted him." He was quiet for a moment. "I think I had stopped looking at a great many things. It is," he paused, choosing the word carefully, "easier, sometimes." "Not to look." She thought about this. "Yes," she said. "It is." He met her eyes. "You never stopped looking. It's my profession." "No," he said. "It's who you are." The shop was very quiet. Outside the cold had settled in fully, the kind of deep January cold that made the world feel very small and very still. "I would like to offer you a position," he said. "A formal one. medical advisor to the Blackwell estate, your own laboratory, properly equipped, a salary commensurate with what you actually do, which is considerably more than most physicians manage. He kept his voice even, professional, though she could see something careful in his eyes. A man who had prepared for the possibility of being told no, and was not certain how he felt about it. Thornfield has needed someone like you for a long time. I think I have needed someone like you for a long time. The sentence ended with a slight shift in register, so subtle she might have missed it. She did not miss it. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about her shop, which was hers, and which she had built by herself over 7 years. She thought about the road, 3 miles. She thought about a library with a good fire and a comfortable chair, and an hour of silence that had felt like the most natural thing in the world. The laboratory, she said. Would I have full authority over it? No interference with methodology or materials. Something in his expression settled. Complete authority. And the position would be understood to include general medical practice for the estate tenants as well. Not only the household, understood and agreed. She nodded slowly. Then I accept. She turned back to her work table, picked up her pen, finished the note she had been writing. I'll need 2 weeks to arrange the transfer of my existing clients to Dr. Alcott, who is better positioned for Harlow anyway. I'll also need a list of current estate staff and their known medical histories, if any records exist. I'll have Mrs. Drummond prepare it. He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him watching her write, the particular quality of attention she had noticed from the first night. Focused, present, giving her the same regard he gave everything he decided to take seriously. Seraphina, he said. She finished the note and looked up. I'm glad you came, he said. When the boy brought the letter, I'm glad you didn't wait. She thought of a Tuesday that had started like any other, of black wax and a stag's head, of a house that had smelled wrong in a way she had filed away and followed, of a man who had offered his wrist without being asked and answered her questions without pride, and who had looked at her in candlelight and said, I will trust you as though it were simple. So am I, she said, and she meant that too.